preconceptions about Dickenson as flowery and sentimental, and not particularly interesting. I thought that her language was kind of drab, and I wasn't really looking forward to reading her work for an entire quarter. In light of that, the immense richness and depth that I discovered in Dickinson's canon astounded me, and I read her poetry with the same fervent attention that I felt she put into it. She takes immense care to craft diction that conveys nuanced meaning in relatively short snippets of verse. Her body of work covers a vast array of topics, from religion and spirituality to the Gothic and the morbid, from identity to sex and gender. And she explores these themes through very disparate tones, including acerbic wit, loftiness, joy, and innocence, that contribute to her project in each poem. Finally, she embodies an array of distinct personas that demonstrate her aptitude for empathy and emphasize the nature of these characters. She writes as an innocent child, a man, a dead person, a married woman, and even, as we'll see later on, an unassuming flower. I personally have been fascinated with the notion of gender roles for longer than I've been able to say that. My mom will remember that when I was a little girl, I told her I wanted boy hair. As you can see, I've kept the do, but I've also developed a keen interest in the way that supposedly masculine or feminine cultures contribute to one's identity, especially in a culture that privileges masculinity while objectifying and subjugating the feminine. And much of Dickinson's poetry explores the fluidity of these roles by insightfully challenging the binary defined by patriarchal culture, a critique that I found intellectual solidarity with over a century after she began writing it, and a critique that strengthens my resolve to stand before you as a woman and a scholar today. Before I read from my paper, I'd just like to share a little bit about some of the experiences that were layered beneath it and kind of provide the foundation for that resulting structure. In Professor Gifford's class, we engaged in rapt discussions about Dickinson's use of binaries. Her juxtaposition of day and night in particular struck me with a vague sort of deja vu. The manner in which she reappropriates these images reminded me of the way Joseph Conrad manipulates the images of light and darkness in Heart of Darkness to craft a nuanced condemnation of colonialism. The manner in which, in addition to this novella, Professor, thank you, also introduced me to the work of theorist Hélène Cixous. So in The Laugh of the Medusa, she identifies in men's writing a gender binary based on activity and passivity, in which femininity is likened to an abyss or a dark continent. She advocates for feminine writing that breaks from this tradition, which is exactly what Dickinson creates through her poetry. Cixous argues that the Medusa is not terrifying or abysmal, but beautiful and wrapped with laughter, and Dickinson similarly portrays darkness as inclusive and infinite, full of possibility. My paper explores how Dickinson manipulates these images to craft a feminine poetic discourse that rejects the negative attributes assigned to femininity by patriarchal dogma and reinvests the feminine with positive values. I'll now read an excerpt from my paper entitled Night's Possibility, Emily Dickinson's Feminist Reappropriation of the Dark Continent, in which I examine Dickinson's fascinating treatment of gender using 3 poems, which you'll find on your sheet. The Government of Day, The Daisy Follows Soft the Sun, and My Best Acquaintances Are Those. Writing in the mid-19th century, Dickinson emerges from the Enlightenment tradition, which relies heavily on images of light and dark, day and night. Within this tradition, the day was represented as life-giving, nurturing, full of revelation. In contrast, Dickinson portrays the nocturnal sphere with these positive qualities and depicts the night as a welcome respite from the sun, which she uses to represent oppressive patriarchal ideology. She sets up this transvaluation by depicting the sun as an aggressive masculine entity, often referring to it with the masculine pronoun. The sun in The Sun and Fog Contested demonstrates this gendered negative representation. The sun and fog contested the government of day. The sun took down his yellow whip and drove the fog away. The sun in this poem cracks his yellow whip like an aggressive dictator in order to dispel the fog that impedes his stifling visual dominion. The word government in this poem represents an institutionalization of patriarchal ideology, which privileges what Byron Cardwell refers to as specularization, the possession, representation, and objectification of woman through the male gaze. In this poem, Dickenson demonstrates that patriarchal institutions rigidly enforce the gender binary that emerges from this specularization by aggressively banishing any fogginess surrounding the roles defined therein. In the poem, The Daisy Follows Soft the Sun exhibits a similar kind of hostility. However, the speaker undermines his authority through a semblance of submission in her quest toward what she calls, at the poem's conclusion, night's possibility. In the first stanza, Dickenson offers an anecdotal metaphor involving two characters, the sun and the daisy. By introducing the second stanza with the explanatory statement, "We are the flower, thou the sun," and inserting a dash between the feminine flower and the masculine sun, between self and other, Dickenson emphasizes the gender binary illustrated in this poem. She challenges the patriarchal notion of femininity as weak and passive by depicting the daisy as soft and shy, then revealing the daisy's subtle strength. In contrast, the masculine sun exerts power through interrogation, demanding a response from the daisy. He accosts her without provocation and reproaches her as a marauder, a plunderer seeking to profit from his golden rays. If you'd like, please take a look at your handout as I read this poem, and take note of the daisy's sly evasion of the sun's aggressive question and the shift that occurs in the second stanza. The daisy follows soft the sun, and when his golden walk is done, sits shyly at his feet. He, waking, finds the flower there. Wherefore, marauder, art thou here? Because, sir, love is sweet. We are the flower, thou the sun. Forgive us if as days decline, we nearer steal to thee. Enamored of the parting west, the peace, the flight, the amethyst, night's possibility. Dickenson gradually discloses a subversive subtext to the first stanza that calls the patriarchal demarcation into question. The plural pronoun, we, used in reference to the single flower, suggests a femininity empowered by collectivity. By asking the sun's forgiveness, the speaker feigns a position of subordination. The ambiguity in the word steal, which means both to take and to move quietly toward, affirms patriarchal notions about femininity's negative character and dependency on the masculine by echoing the sun's accusation of the daisy as a marauder. But in the next line, the speaker reveals that she does not love the sun, as patriarchal precepts dictate. She is enamored of the parting west and eagerly awaits the sun's departure so that she can experience peace and take flight. Dickenson portrays this ecstatic anticipation through the repeated use of exclamation marks in the second stanza. Flight represents the autonomy to transcend the restrictive gender role imposed upon the speaker, a role that effectively roots her to the plot delineated by patriarchal discourse. Night's possibility epitomizes freedom from the patriarchal gaze and the opportunity for self-definition. This notion of possibility contrasts with the prescriptive and rigid golden walk of the sun, which the daisy must obediently and passively follow as long as his gaze remains fixed upon her. Thus, night represents a reprieve from patriarchal oppression and the opportunity to explore an empowered femininity. Unlike the antagonistic masculine sun, the night's inhabitants treat those they visit with respect. Dickenson exemplifies this deferential regard in the poem, "My best acquaintances are those," which I'll read for you now. My best acquaintance